Welcome. Today, we're diving into an incredibly high stakes world. Pharmaceutical buyouts are literally some of the biggest gambles in modern business. I mean, we're talking about an arena where human health and massive corporate empires hang entirely in the balance of clinical data. So, for today's explainer, we are dissecting a singular, incredibly dense piece of news that sits right at the intersection of life saving medical science and, frankly, massive corporate finance. We're going to unpack exactly what happens when a pharmaceutical giant places a billion-dollar bet on a potential cancer treatment and what that ultimately means for the future of oncology. Okay, let's dive into this. $1 billion. It's a staggering figure, right? And in the world of pharmaceutical development, this number is the absolute financial anchor of today's story. But it's actually absolutely crucial to understand why this number is so huge and yet, surprisingly enough, kind of standard in the field of oncology. Bringing just one single successful cancer drug to market typically costs well over $1 billion in research and development. So when Glenmark makes a move like this, it isn't just a simple purchase. Actually, scratch that. It's more like the assumption of massive future financial risk. They're taking on the staggering costs of upcoming clinical trials and regulatory battles, betting heavily that this specific scientific mechanism is going to yield a massive payoff. And that's a payout both financially for the company's shareholders and medically for patients worldwide who desperately need new options. Which brings us to the core headline. Glenmark advances Trastuzumab Rezetecan to phase 3 cancer trials following a buyout. Now, the true weight of this development lies entirely in the combination of those exact words. You've got phase 3 and buyout occurring in the very same sentence. This represents the precise moment a really compelling scientific hypothesis is forced to meet unforgiving corporate accountability. We have a highly specific medical asset entering the absolute most critical stage of clinical testing, all operating under the heavy shadow of a billion-dollar transaction. So, to really understand the stakes at play here, we need to split this headline into its core components. Section 1. Decoding Trastuzumab Rezetecan. Now, what's really interesting here is this drug itself, Trastuzumab Rezetecan. Yes, it's a very complex name, but it represents a highly specific cancer-targeting drug recently acquired by Glenmark. To really grasp the value of this asset, we need to understand how targeted therapies are totally revolutionizing oncology. Historically, treating cancer has relied heavily on traditional chemotherapy. That's essentially a carpet bombing approach. It attacks rapidly dividing cells, which sure kills the cancer, but it also causes devastating collateral damage to healthy tissues throughout the body. Trastuzumab Rezetecan, though, belongs to a newer, far more sophisticated class of treatments. Think of it more like a smart bomb. It is engineered at the molecular level to seek out and bind only to specific proteins found right on the surface of cancer cells, delivering a lethal payload directly to the tumor while attempting to spare the surrounding healthy tissue. So Glenmark didn't just buy a company, they bought this specific, highly engineered mechanism of action, betting that this targeted approach will be a definitive weapon in the fight against cancer. Section 2. The Phase 3 Milestone. Let's walk through this development pipeline. Step 1 is early stage testing. This is where initial safety and basic biological activity get established in smaller groups of patients. Then, Step 2 marks the strategic business maneuver, that massive $1 billion buyout based on the really promising data from those early results. But Step 3 is where we are today, the initiation of Phase 3 trials. In the pharmaceutical industry, the gap between early testing and Phase 3 is quite often referred to as the valley of death. And there's a good reason for that. Human biology at scale is incredibly complex and almost entirely unpredictable. The vast majority of promising experimental drugs just fail during this transition. So reaching Phase 3 means the drug has survived that rigorous early gauntlet. It's now being administered to a massive, diverse group of patients to definitively confirm its effectiveness and safety. It brings the drug incredibly close to the finish line of actual patient use. But, and this is a big but, it's also where the risk of catastrophic failure is at its absolute highest. So the crucial point is captured perfectly right here. Glenmark initiates Phase 3 trial of $1 billion cancer buyout Trastuzumab Rezetecan. Hitting this specific scientific milestone is exactly what triggers the next phase of corporate strategy. See, initiating a Phase 3 trial locks a pharmaceutical company into spending tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars just to run the clinical sites, gather the data, and monitor the patients over several years. There is absolutely no turning back from this point. Glenmark has effectively pushed their chips to the center of the table. The theoretical science is over. Phase 3 represents the real-world, highly expensive test of their billion-dollar investment. Section 3. A billion-dollar buyout. And this brilliantly illustrates the fundamental tension we see in modern medicine. On one side, we have the medical goal, right? Advancing a cutting-edge drug through phase 3 to save lives and treat cancer. It's a vital pursuit driven by patient advocacy and the urgent need for better oncology treatments. But on the other side, we have the business reality, securing a return on a massive $1 billion buyout investment. And this is driven by shareholder expectations, market forces, and the simple reality that capital has to generate a return. These two realities, they're inextricably linked. The financial gamble just cannot succeed without a genuine scientific triumph that actually helps patients. And conversely, that scientific triumph is entirely dependent on massive financial gambles to fund these incredibly expensive phase 3 trials in the first place. It's this complex, fascinating ecosystem where profit motives and life-saving innovations are permanently bound together. Looking across this timeline, the past is defined by that initial massive financial investment, the buyout. The present is exactly where we stand right now, with the trial initiation putting the science to the ultimate test. But the future, the trial results and the subsequent market potential, well, that's entirely dependent on what happens in the clinic over the coming months and years. If this phase 3 trial succeeds, it triggers a massive shift. Medically, it could become a whole new standard of care, completely altering how certain cancers are treated. Commercially, it grants Glenmark lucrative patent monopolies, potentially generating billions in annual revenue and cementing their position as an oncology powerhouse. But if the trial fails, the consequences are equally stark. That billion-dollar initial investment, plus the hundreds of millions spent on the trial, effectively vanishes in thin air, causing stock crashes and corporate restructuring. And more importantly, it represents a totally devastating setback for the patients who are relying on a new beacon of hope. Which leaves us right here. So, what will a successful phase 3 trial actually mean for the future of this billion-dollar gamble? It is the ultimate high-stakes environment where human health and massive capital collide. Keep your eyes on the upcoming clinical data, folks, because those numbers and those numbers alone will ultimately write the ending to this story. Keep questioning and keep exploring.